Yeah, so once again, thank you. My name is Feyi, and you can call me Feyikemi. I'm a front-end engineer with over 5 years of experience creating beautiful performance products with delightful user experience for both medium to large size company. And my recent workplace is at Manchester City, where I work as a front-end engineer. This afternoon, we are gonna talk about um, techniques in debugging CSS bug. And then we are going to go through some fundamental concept of CSS for effective debugging, common CSS issues and their solutions, utilizing debugging tools and environments, best practices for maintaining clean CSS. Yeah, do we have any front-end engineer in the house? Feel free to, signal on the group chats if you are a web developer or if you are aspiring to be one. I'm saying Kim raising a hand. Oh, Anna.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so that's good to, it's good to have people in their house. Yeah, so I'm just gonna go to the next slide that says, just some introduction on CSS and CSS debugging. So CSS is an acronym for Cascading Style Sheets. It's a styling language used to define visual presentation of web pages. It controls the layouts, the colors, fonts, animations, and the overall appearance of websites. So CSS helps developer to apply styling to HTML elements. Then going to CSS debugging is a process of identifying and fixing styles that prevent a web page from displaying correctly. Moving on, we have some fundamental concepts to keep in mind when we are debugging, right? So if this, we have some, these fundamental concepts have to, like, is the foundations that all web developers should have. So I think the first one is proper markup. So I put in here that proper markup is essential for effective CSS applications. So when I'm debugging, I look out for proper markup like misspell selectors. So if I have class name in my HTML, I want to make sure it matches the same name in my CSS file. So another one is specificity. So specificity is the algorithm that is used by browsers to determine the CSS declaration that is the most relevant to an element. So which in turn determines the property value to apply to the element. We also have inheritance. So inheritance as deals with styling that applies to an element. The same styling will also applies to the descendants unless specifically overridden. So when it comes to inheritance, there are some properties that actually that applies to the element and also applies to the descendants. That means we have fonts, that's the font family, all the properties that deal with fonts, like the font family, the font size. We also have text transform. We also have some lists items. So all these properties deals with the helps to, the helps when you apply it to an element, it also applies to the descendant. And we also have some properties that are related to box model, that's padding, margin, border. Those are not inherited. Going forward, we have cascade. So as the name implies, cascading. So cascading follows a top to bottom order. So which means that the order of CSS rules is essential. So it answered the questions how styles are combined by browsers when they are from different sources. So for instance, we have the user agent, we have the browser style sheet, and we have the auto style sheet. So the auto style sheets are our own code, like as a developer, we write our code, right? So that's the auto style sheet. So the user also get to, have some codes. So for instance, your user can actually change the font size of their device. They could, apply, some styling. There are some settings to apply that allow users to also apply some stylings to your website. So these are user agents. Then we have some default styling from the browsers. For instance, if you check your paragraph, you have some styling from the browsers. So all these Cascade combines all these styles, and then he knows how to, which one comes first and which ones goes. So if you have the same styles for each of these, Cascades, follows from top to bottoms on all these styles. Going forward, we have parents to child relationships. So properties such as width, like height or position of an element, are always relative to its viewpoint. And viewpoint is not always the browser's window. So viewpoint can be the direct parent elements. It could be, I think sometimes we kind of misplace this where we have um, paragraph inside the if or paragraph inside sections. So we have to know the current element direct parent. So, and this influence layout and element styling. Going forward, I want to talk about absolute and relative units. So absolute units like pixel provide fixed dimensions. So relative units like AMRFs, they adapt to user settings. Using relative units enhances accessibility and responsiveness. So absolute units do not scale across screen sizes, resulting in an overflow of the website and a jumped appearances. So one thing to keep in mind is that relative units are always, they are always adaptive to user settings, and I always use relative units, especially when it comes to mobile media and also desktop and mobile setup. And if I'm thinking about mobile first design, and they are always accessibility, they're also always accessible rather. Yeah, so you want to keep using relative units, and also when you're making use of I don't remember right now. Okay, so when you're making use of okay, so I think I'm just gonna talk about that when I remember. Okay, so moving forward, I want to talk about how browsers treat display inline and display block. So for inline and display or inline block, so we have some space within them, just as the way we type in our words on the keypad where we have space. So when you have display block, when you have display inline or the particular elements, browser actually gives in some spaces. So setting two or more elements to display inline or display inline blocks will create a tiny space between each word. So the space is added because the browser is interpreting elements as words. And so it's adding a character space between each one. So we can see in this diagram, we have some li elements inside UL. And, we already have a spacing from the browsers. And then we are adding margin right, 8 pixel. So if we inspect it, we will be thinking, okay, I should have 8 pixel in this, the space should be 8 pixel, but we later got 12 pixel. So how to fix this? This could be, inside display flex. So if this list items, if we had display, if they are inside a display flex parent, the spacing will be gone. So that's one way to fix this particular bug. And then I would like to talk about replace elements, and then how the browser treats display blocks. So normally when you had display blocks on some element like span and or some your list items, you have, you have the features for display blocks. But there are some items that even if you had display blocks on them, like image, like inputs, you will still have some different different features. Why? Because they are replaced elements. So replaced elements are elements whose their width and their height are predefined without CSS. They already have how they're gonna react. They already have how they're gonna, their width and their height without even you adding your own CSS. So they have their dimension regardless of display properties. So like on this image, I have before and after of, so by default, we have image, and this input we already had, we've already added display block onto it, thinking it should, get the same width of the width of its parent. So this will work unless you enforce a width 100% to it. So that's how replace what elements works. Another elements that are replace elements are also iframe, and there's a lot of them on. You can check MDN. Yeah. So another thing I would like to talk about replace elements are, you can use pseudo elements on them, like before and after. If you are gonna use all these pseudo elements on them, you're gonna target the parents instead. So these are things to keep in mind in debugging. Going forward, we have margin collapse. So margin collapse occurs when vertical margins of blocks meet. And then 1 second. So I write here that top and bottom margins of elements are sometimes they collapse into a single margin that is equal to the largest of the two margins. So when we have vertical margins, to avoid margin collapse, we can use borders or paddings, or we can just stick to one directional margins. So like in this diagram, I have two contexts, the top one and the lower one. And for the top one, I applied margin 50 pixel. That's it for the bottom. And for the top, I have margin 30 pixel, expecting to have 80 pixel, right? Because, but according to margin collapse, it just takes the big one, the bigger size, that would be the 50 pixel, and because it's the bigger, and then because it's the higher number rather. So, and that's why we have 50 pixel instead of 30 pixel. So another thing to keep in mind about margin collapse is that if these elements, this content is, if they are inside a flexbox or grid container, the margin will not collapse. We still have 80 pixels. So these are the things to keep in mind. You can apply, you can either apply one directional margin. That means you can just apply margin bottom to all your elements instead, or you stick to margin top, or you apply border or padding in between the content. Yeah, so moving forward, I have the index, and then and stacking context. So the C index property enables us to control how HTML elements are positioned on top of each other. So using numeric values. So at first, it might seem that positioning an element on top of its siblings or parent is as simple as setting the index to maybe 9999. I think that's what developers always do. So that's not always the case, as the index has certain rules to be followed. So the first rule for Z index is that Z index only applies to positioned elements. You have to put position relative, absolute, or fixed to your element in order for Z index to work. So static element will not respond to Z index changes. And also we have some default stacking orders. So by default, our elements, we actually appear as we put it in the HTML file. For instance, I have in this diagram, if I have my floor first, then I have my table, and on top of that, I have my laptop. So this is how they're gonna show. So I'll have my laptop first, then I'll have my table, then the floor underneath. So this is how these elements appear in the browser by default. But when we want to have C index, we want to actually kind of change the normal flow. Then there are some certain elements or certain properties rather that create a stacking context for child elements. So for instance, opacity or transform. If you apply an opacity to an element, it creates a new stacking context, a stacking order for that particular child. So in this second element, in this second diagram, I have an element with position absolute, and I have an element with position opacity. So we could see that we have the opacity creating a new stacking order. So normally we will be expecting the absolute to be on top, but in this case, it's the opacity. That's because opacity property creates a new stacking order. So I hope that helps. Moving forward, I have the box model itself. So the box model defines the structure of HTML elements. And one important thing to keep in mind is having to put outline or border to our elements. And this is very useful in case we have an overflow. So every single element on a web page is a square or a rectangle. Even if an element appears as a circle or has rounded edges, it's still a rectangular box. When debugging, we have to keep this in mind. So if you don't understand what is going on with your layouts, always put an outline or border on it. If you cannot see it, you cannot style it. So when I have maybe an overflow, I put border, and then I kind of say, so for instance, if you minimize the current screen to maybe the mobile screen, you kind of see an overflow. You can put some outline. Then you can also style each element with different backgrounds just to make the debugging clearer. So then I move on to have you can also have different colors for particular content, but that's not necessary. But if you had outline and then you move to mobile view, you can only see these sizes and then the dimension or the element that is causing the overflow. Yeah. Moving forward, I have how to boost CSS specificity without using important. So use more specific selectors to increase specificity effectively. So I kind of combine to class. So calling a class twice increases the specificity of a selector. So instead of working with important, so you can actually add two classes. Like if you have button, you can put button and button. This will increase the specificity of that particular element instead of using important. And another thing I avoid is using inline styles since they have high specificity, but they are less maintainable. So also you can avoid having to target button in different places instead of if it's not inside media query. Going forward, I would like to talk about the debugging environment, which is the Chrome DevTools. Before I move forward, I would like to give space for questions. I don't know if anybody has questions.
There are no questions that have come in the chat yet. So, but if at any point anyone has any questions, do just pop them in, but none have come in yet.
All right, thank you, Kim. Yeah, so let's talk about the DevTools and yeah, maybe the Chrome or Firefox. Yeah, so DevTools, browser developer tools provide essential features for debugging CSS, helping developers to identify and fix style issues quickly. So you can open DevTools by, you rather right click on the web page element and select inspect or use keyboard shortcut like Ctrl+Shift+I or Windows or Command Option I or Mac. And then this will allow you to, see the styles applied to that particular element. You can always toggle the styles, write your own styles on the DevTools, like write instead of going to your IDE and then write all the elements. You can write directly there and see the changes on that particular element. You can copy your there's a way you can copy the particular styles and then paste it on your IDE. And you can also identify typo and invalid properties and values. So Chrome has this inbuilt feature where you can, once an element is not working or you have a misspell on your elements, you can always see this under the styles, and then you have this green feature on it where it says, and when you click on it, it gives you why this element is not going to apply. So here we have flex has no effect on these elements, it's not a flex items. So it also gives you some suggestion on, okay, you can try this, you can try that. So which is very useful for debugging. Another feature is working around with alignments. So where we are using grid or flex box, and you want to align. Alignment is key for flexible and responsive layout. So you can do this in real time. So in this diagram, you can always go to grid, display grid, and there's this small icon where you can click. When you click it, it gives you a new pop-up. And then this new pop-up you can always click on each of the icon and it will affect the elements, that's the flex items, and align them according to the icons that you picked. For instance, you can align the contents, you can stretch it, you can justify content, just to give you a different view of how the elements will position before, making a final judgment or final decision on what you want to do. So moving forward, you can also identify unused CSS code. this is very useful when you have a large code base, and then you will kind of know which CSS is not useful on a particular page. So you can use it, you open your DevTools and navigate to the coverage tab. So you start recording to analyze CSS usage on that particular page. And then after sometimes you review the results to which CSS rules are not applied. As you can see in this image, I have some red. All these red means these lines are not applied to that particular to that page. So it's just there. So which is affecting performance. So it also gives you some unused bytes, the visualization, and you have the grain. The grains ones are the ones that are used for at a particular moment. So you can go on and clear it on your IDE, and then check again and run the go to the coverage tab again. Yeah, so this is very useful for identifying unused CSS code. And even if you are reviewing or reviewing another person's code, you can as well check their CSS that are not useful on a particular component or a particular page. So I would like to talk about another tools that kind of help in debugging or making sure your implementations actually align very well with what is there on Figma, what the UI UX designer is actually has put on. So VisBug is a browser extension that simplifies web debugging. So you just add it as an extension on your Chrome, and then it gives you a lot of features, like you can see the margins and paddings tools for precise adjustment. You can align. It has an alignment tools, but I think the ones that I use mostly is measuring tools. So measuring tools, they allow you to compare distance between elements. You can see, okay, this is the overall height of this particular element, like just what you see on Figma. So you can see it right away on your browser, which is very useful. Finally, I would like to talk about some best practices on using to keep in mind. So we have linting tools to catch syntax errors early. So you can apply some linting tools to, they will yell at you when you do some mistakes. So this will help you in your coding experience. So we can always regularly validate your CSS to ensure standard compliance. So that means checking your CSS. Also adopt a modular CSS approach to enhance maintainability. So that means going to that's mobile first approach, having to keep away from importance, all those, then keeping CSS that is very small. That means having some small style sheet for each particular element, and then keep your style sheet organized for easier debugging. So organization is key when it comes to CSS, and then foster a practice of code reviews to spot potential issues. So another issue is you can always allow people to review your code just to see, and then just to detect what you can dictate as well. So yeah, so I guess this is my final slides, and then I'm gonna go back if you have any question so far.